Professor Schofield, and thanks very much for coming today. I'm looking forward to your feedback. I'm going to talk a bit about today chronic sleep deprivation among the poor in India. There's actually a lot of good reasons to think that people in developing countries may be very sleep deprived. So in particular, there are a lot of environmental factors which are likely to lead to very poor sleep quantity and quality. So heat, mosquitoes, light, noise, uncomfortable sleeping conditions are all very prevalent in a lot of these areas. We did some psychomotor vigilance testing, and we find that the typical reaction times in this population are over twice what you would find in a well-rested population in the US. What we see is that there's very little that's known about the extent of sleep deprivation in these contexts, and how to improve sleep in this context, and also the impact of that deprivation on economic outcomes as well as cognitive function and decision-making more generally. The first difficulty here is actually measuring sleep. So we're going to use 3 different methods of measuring sleep in this study, and that's what we've started doing. The first is wireless actigraphs, which are basically, you've probably seen a bunch of these Fitbits, Jawbones, that type of thing. You can get research-grade varieties of those. They're basically devices which utilize accelerometers, and you can typically use them. They look like a wristwatch. Secondarily, there's a task called the psychomotor vigilance task, which is a computerized task requiring continuous attention where you react very quickly to stimuli. And performance on this task is actually very well correlated with sleep deprivation. And finally, we can also use survey measures to get at sleep quantity and quality, as well as disturbances, napping, and other aspects of sleep, such as alertness. We drew up a set of criteria for an ideal study population, and now we're going out and trying to find populations that match those criteria well. So the ideal criteria are that the individuals have fairly poor sleep, which seems to be relatively prevalent in most of these populations, so that should be easy to find. That they have flexible and measurable productivity, because we're looking to measure their productivity in a real-world environment, so we want to be able to pick up changes fairly quickly. And that also we want has a group with a consistent profession, so that there's less variation and we can measure these effects well. And we need them to be geographically concentrated so that we can talk to them every day about their sleep deprivation and their productivity. So with that in mind, we're looking to about 10 different populations at this point, and doing some work to see how well they fit these various criteria. I think some of these you'll be very familiar with, and others are probably ones you're not so familiar with. So for example, rag pickers are individuals who walk through the city dump and sort out recyclable materials. So then once we have a study population, the next step will be to run a 3-month pilot study to determine the feasibility and effectiveness of different interventions. In particular, we're considering 2 interventions at this point. The first targets some of these environmental factors that I was discussing earlier that we are seeing as kind of large barriers to people sleeping well. So we would kind of give people a set of different technologies, I guess you could call them, to improve their sleep environment. So curtains for their windows, earplugs for their ears, and say a fan to help with mosquitoes and heat. And the second of the 2 interventions which we'll try in the pilot is a napping intervention. So we could easily set up a much more kind of comfortable and effective napping environment for individuals and try to improve their sleep that way. So we'll do this 3-month pilot phase with a small number of participants to try to get a relative sense of effectiveness of these 2 studies and what we can do to improve sleep. And then we'll run a 5-month randomized control trial with the most efficacious treatment. On a daily basis, we'll collect information about the quality of their sleep through the actigraphs, the PBT, and the sleep surveys. We'll also collect this data on their productivity, so their labor supply and earnings. So for example, if we were working with rag pickers, we would measure how much recyclable material they removed from the dump and how much they're paid for it. And then we would also do some decision-making tasks to help get a sense of how real-world decision-making might be changing. And an economic production task in the laboratory. So again, using the example of rag pickers, we might do a sorting task, which is very similar to the work that they do in the real world, but we can get much more precise measurements in the lab. And then finally, at the end of the study, we'll also measure their willingness to invest in sleep to understand whether they've learned something about the value of getting better sleep through this process. So for example, they would be presented with a choice between a voucher for a consumer good or for a sleep-related investment.